What's going on, guys? My name is Jay. I'm a sharp sports bettor in the city of Las Vegas, Nevada, aka the sports gambling capital of the world. And in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about good quality handicapping. A lot of sports bettors introduce bias into their handicapping process, and really this comes from not having a strong procedure or process that they consistently follow to begin with. A lot of sports bettors just kind of wing it, right? They just kind of place the bet that they feel like is going to happen, and they just go from there without any actual handicapping procedure and no type of process in assigning a probability, right? There's no work that is put into the handicapping process, so they don't have any calibration to begin with. And if they do attempt to have some calibration or some handicapping process to derive calibration in their bets, then what they'll usually do is introduce a form of bias into their handicapping process. So what is bias? What is handicapping bias, right? Handicapping bias in sports betting refers to a consistent and unintentional deviation from neutrality or impartiality in a bettor's analysis or decision making, okay? It stems from cognitive tendencies or flawed statistical methods that systematically misjudge teams, players, or outcomes. And usually this comes from some type of built-in assumption, some predisposition, some idea or concept that they developed about sports betting or handicapping, and it results in miscalibrated assessments of these teams. And this is bad because over time what's going to happen is that they're going to have miscalibrated probabilities, which results in a lower ROI over time. So two examples of biases that kind of go together are confirmation bias and anchoring bias. And essentially what both of these are an attachment to a form of information, right? They're an attachment to a concept or information that we have. So confirmation bias is seeking out and validating information that reinforces our initial assumption or belief, right? So we have some initial assumption in a bet, and what we're going to do is we're going to find information that reinforces what we already think is going to happen. Anchoring bias is very similar. What that is subconsciously giving weight to information that reinforces the first piece of information you received. This is a reason why I believe in doing a lot of handicapping before you look at the odds of a bet. See, when you look at the odds of a bet first, usually what you're going to do is anchor to those odds, right? Suppose a team is minus 300 and the opposing team is plus 334. You're now going to go about handicapping and researching with those odds in the back of your mind. And what that's going to result in is almost like a subconscious sway towards one side or the other. You're now going to be heavily influenced by that minus 300 or that plus 334 number. You're now going to be influenced by the odds that you've seen because those odds now play a role in your handicapping process. See, it's very hard to do handicapping knowing that you have a plus 300 payout possibility, or knowing that you have to take a minus 300 set of odds on this bet. And spreads and totals are usually the same thing. If you look at a spread and it's at minus 4, you now have the minus 4 number in your head. So any handicapping that you do is going to be heavily influenced by that minus 4. It's very difficult to originate when you are heavily influenced by the information that you've previously seen. So this confirmation bias and this anchoring bias is very common amongst sports bettors. And if you have this bias, it's going to be very problematic in developing calibrated probabilities in the long run. So you always want to practice doing as much research as possible, forming your own opinion first, and then looking at the lines later. Another popular one is group think bias, and this is weighing the public or popular opinion too heavily. A lot of bettors take the favorite not necessarily because the favorite is the better team, but because more people are betting on this team. And this is completely erroneous. You don't want to take a bet simply because more people are betting on this team. You can't be afraid to be a contrarian to the popular opinion if you want to actually make money betting sports. Now, this isn't to say that the public is always wrong. Obviously, we know that there are times when we want to back the public. when we want to be on the same side as the majority. But we need to consider the public's opinion independent of our own analysis, right? Again, we always want to draw our own conclusions through our own research. So if we allow the public opinion or the majority opinion to influence the inferences that we draw through our handicapping, then we're introducing a form of bias that's going to result in miscalibrated probabilities in the long run. Another big one is hindsight bias. This is a very popular one amongst even high-level sports bettors. And what this is misattributing reasons for betting wins and losses to non-informative observations made in hindsight. So whenever you win or you lose a bet, usually you're going to want to find a reason for why that happened, right? You're going to want to find a rhyme and reason as to why that bet won or lost. Now, the problem with doing retrospective analysis is that you can almost always find some reason for either side, okay? So if the bet won, you can find reasons for that. And if the bet lost, you'll find plenty of reasons for that. Now, this becomes problematic when you want to take retrospective analysis and try to use it for predictive analysis. This is where it becomes dangerous because retrospective patterns are not the same as predictive patterns, okay? Hindsight is very clear. Hindsight is 20/20. That's very easy for any handicapper to do, to look back and say, this is why I won or lost this bet. The challenge is predictive analytics. When we start conflating retrospective and hindsight analysis with predictive analytics, we're introducing a very strong form of bias that's going to result in miscalibrated probabilities. Now, this isn't to say that we shouldn't look back in hindsight and see how we can get better, right? How we can improve. But we have to be very careful when it comes to using retrospective insights and trying to apply them in a predictive manner. Another big one is the favorite-longshot bias, and this is overvaluing underdogs and underestimating the legitimacy of the favorite. And usually you're going to see this in bettors who are betting to win instead of betting to risk. Again, sportsbooks are always going to show you how much you stand to win on a bet, right? So when you become infatuated with how much you stand to win, usually you're going to end up betting on the underdog. It's a natural flow of psychology. Sportsbooks show you what you stand to win, so psychologically you're going to gravitate towards betting on the underdog because the underdog is always going to pay out more. Now, this is a very flawed and miscalibrated way to bet because you're essentially introducing a very strong form of bias into any type of predictions that you're making. You never want to place bets on the underdog simply because of the appeal of how much they have to pay out. If it's not mathematically justified, you do not bet the underdog. You want to make your decision on whether or not to go with the favorite or the underdog, not on the emotions that the potential payout elicits, but on what the mathematically profitable choice is. Gambler's fallacy is the mistaken belief that the probability of an independent random event is influenced by previous outcomes. And this is one of the most common fallacies, not just in sports betting, but in all of gambling. And if you understand it, you will save yourself a lot of money. Sports betting, for the most part, is composed of independent events. The outcomes of one game do not necessarily influence the outcomes of another, within reason. A lot of people have this idea that professional teams are sometimes due for a win or a loss because of a previous streak that they're on, and this is erroneous. Teams are not usually due. Okay, teams are not due for anything when it comes to professional leagues, right? Even at the collegiate level, a lot of these teams are not due just because they've had a string of wins or losses. What it is that they regress. Teams regress to their expected skill level after a string of deviations, okay? But this is different from being due for something. Under certain circumstances, we can employ certain statistical methods to calculate and time this regression, okay? So that's a lot different from saying that a team is actually due for a win or a loss. And it sounds very similar, but it's actually very different. These are not the same thing, okay? So we can't conflate the idea of a team being due with the idea of a team's regression. One of the core purposes of a sports betting model is to remove any and all biases from the handicapping process. So a mathematical framework when it comes to handicapping is your best safeguard against any type of bias. Anytime you have subjective reasoning or a opinion in your handicapping, you're exposing yourself to the potential of introducing bias into your handicapping process. The more you lean on mathematics and a statistical framework to make your decisions, the less bias you'll introduce into your handicapping, resulting in more calibration and a positive ROI over time. With this being said, models and mathematical frameworks do have some biases of their own. So things like sampling error, omitted variable bias, and miscalibration of the model are problematic. And these are things that we have to address separately in the model itself. So in a way, it's almost like a trade-off. But with that being said, for the overwhelming majority of sports bettors, if you truly want to be sharp, you want to implement a very strong model or a very rigorous mathematical framework into your handicapping. Most bettors simply introduce too much bias into the handicapping process to actually handicap without a model effectively. Removing bias consciously is something you can do, but it takes awareness and practice to do this. So that is it, guys. That is what a bias is in handicapping and how to handle it. Hopefully this made sense and you guys got something out of it, and you understand that if you remove these biases from your handicapping, you will have more calibrated probabilities and higher ROI in your sports bets. Feel free to like, share, drop a comment down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.